Hello and welcome to another episode of the BigMx Radio Podcast. I am your host, Brad Gebhart. This podcast is brought to you by Racetech. Racetech suspension and engines. You can mention BigMx Radio and you can save with BigMx Radio and Racetech. Racetech Gold Valves, basically a revalve in a box with better plushness, increased bottoming resistance, and better traction. All that means is you're going to drop your lap times and feel more comfortable on your motorcycle. And with us on the line, as well as on YouTube Live here, we have someone who has a whole lot more information than I do about it. Welcome to the podcast for the very first time as a solo guest, Chris Riesenberg, to the Big MX Radio Podcast. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. I'm glad that we're finally doing this. We've obviously done a lot together and talked a lot, but we really haven't done a deep dive back through everything that I'm all about and why I'm here today.
Absolutely. We look to sort of dig right into the nuts and bolts of what sort of has made you so successful on the throughout the industry, honestly, on a ton of different levels, from an analytical standpoint, marketing standpoint, as well as building up some pretty cool brands and working with some really neat companies. So let's start off with some background story. Where does the sort of cross-section between motocross and Chris Riesenberg first collide, and then kind of go off in the same direction after that?
Well, I think like most people, I was born into it. My family raced. My dad raced growing up. He was unfortunately had a couple wheels too many. Thankfully, I didn't follow him down that path of four wheels. And on my 6th birthday, woke up to a nice shiny PW50, and the venture started there. And I mean, honestly, growing up, I still, as far back as I can remember, I went to sleep every single night watching dirt bikes on my TV. I had VHS recordings of all the races and then all the moto movies, and you just fall asleep watching them. And I mean, I've been a super fan my entire life. So to transition into something in the industry at some point was kind of always a goal. I raced all the way up into the pro ranks. I did one pro national that went terribly. Raced a lot of local pro stuff, did a couple of years of arena cross, but ultimately decided I wasn't going to make a living riding my dirt bike. So it was transition into the real life and real world. And also, just being a fan of everything, transitioned to playing all the moto video games growing up. We traveled a ton and in the motorhome, just grinding out laps with my buddies and stuff. And really fell in love with that side of it as well. And I mean, that took me all the way to, I guess, my 3rd year of college. It was time for semester. I was going to college to be an elementary teacher. And at that point, I was racing on the weekends. There was a little money race that ran every Friday night. And I would go race up there to basically make money to spend on the week at college. But I wasn't practicing or putting any effort in. Like I said, that dream had sailed, and I was over college. I didn't want to be a teacher anymore. I didn't like school, so I didn't know how I was going to go to school every day. And I saw a job opportunity for Rainbow Studios to go as a track designer for the MX versus ATV games, which I was already playing. There was a PC version of MX versus ATV Unleashed that I built quite a few tracks for online and such. And I was like, well, that's a job that I would like, that'd be fun. So I sent them an email asking, what do you have to go to college for? Or, how do you get into this industry? And the next day I got a phone call, and it was a phone interview, and I didn't even know it was a phone interview. A couple days later, I was flying out to Phoenix for an in-person interview and offered the job on the spot. They had seen the work that I'd done previously. I guess my attitude didn't suck, and they gave me an opportunity. So that was kind of what launched me actually into the industry on a business side versus obviously just a rider and a fan. And I mean, it was a dream job at 19 or 21 years old.
spending some time right in the trenches during sort of like the infancy of online gaming and video. Like I always say video games in general go all the way back to the early 80s, but as far as like good motocross games, I'm thinking of like Motocross Madness 2, those Rainbow Studios titles that were pretty iconic right in through the earliest portion of like motocross video gaming. Like what made you want to like feel like you could actually like kind of make some tracks and stuff like that? Like I was too young to like sort of be on the internet and doing that at the time. Like I think maybe 4 or 5 years younger than you, maybe a few more, but either way, like what was that landscape like, and how quickly were you able to sort of get a knack for it and flex some creativity?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the earliest days of playing in a sandbox. Basically, I mean, I spent day after day in a dirt pile just building tracks and jumps and such, for toy dirt bikes, and it transitioned into games. And I think it's a subject of me having a little bit of ADD, when it comes to that side of things. Like I would play the games, and once I've ridden all the tracks and found out all the rhythms, I wanted to create something instead of playing the same track over and over. I was more into the creating than grinding laps and lap times. So I'd played a little bit of Motocross Madness, but I never had a computer good enough to run it. But then I finally got my parents to give me a nice enough computer, and we ran Motocross Madness 2. And uh, I found the online community there pretty awesome, like just the racing side as well as downloading tracks and that side of things. And I figured out I had to learn. So I jumped in and started learning Photoshop and learning how to make tracks. And I just self-taught, asked questions, and kind of just grinded my way through it because it was something I wanted to learn. So there was nothing going to stop me from doing it. Like I was going to figure it out. So it started there. And then, I mean, I was probably 12 years old, something like that. And I started to get decent at it. And I think a lot of it was, my racing background helped considerably, as far as I wanted to capture the feel of riding a real dirt bike. And I've ridden so many different tracks and stuff. And even when I look at a track maps now, I kind of analyze things maybe a little bit differently than a lot of other people, just from having conversations. So I wanted to create an experience that feels like actually riding the track versus there's other people out there that do a really good job of, like, they'll do a 1-to-1 replica scaled version of a track, but it doesn't really necessarily capture that feeling of riding Supercross, for instance. And that wasn't what I wanted. Like I wanted the feeling of the pop and the off the jumps and that side of things. And I seem to have a knack for creating that and creating a fun flow, and obviously people liked it. So I was able to land a really cool opportunity.
Your success story within the industry, as well as just that avenue, is so similar to so many other success stories that I've heard, whether it be within the sport of motocross or elsewhere in the world. It's that initial interest, the passion to want to learn, and the willingness to put in the time, regardless of sort of how much time it takes you to actually acquire the skills necessary for you to get where you want to be. Like, it really sounds to me like this was something that, if it took 10 hours a day, it would never feel like work. And honestly, if you can do something that truly makes you happy, which obviously this was something that clearly did at the time in your life, that's such a powerful thing. And like when people like yourself are put in that sort of position, the sky's the limit as far as what they can achieve. And it must have been a pretty cool experience too, like you said, like just like you just wanted to know some information about the possibility of working for Rainbow Studios. They call you up the very next day for an interview. I'm curious how that interview went, and then sort of how you got your feet wet and really acclimated yourself to that role.
Yeah, it was really actually sweet. I was on my way. Again, I was a really big fan, so I was on my way to the Rockford Arena Cross, with actually, I was at my now boss's shop when I got my phone interview. Um, we were hanging out, and he was doing the suspension and engines for the Arena Cross team that I was traveling with, to the race where a couple of my buddies rode for. When I got the phone call, that turned into being the phone interview. And then conveniently enough, they wanted to interview me the Friday before the Phoenix Supercross, which as soon as I saw that they were booking my flights, I was like, can you book my flight to come back on Monday? Because I want to stay for the race. um, so I flew out, and I mean, like I said, just seeing the place, and I got to play. They were in the middle of making MX versus ATV Untamed, so I actually got to play the title ahead of time, which that by itself was worth the trip to me, because again, I was just a huge fan who happened to be having this opportunity um, to do something I probably would have done for free. Like I didn't care. They were talking about salary and stuff. I mean, at the time I was part-time working as a cashier at the grocery store and racing on Friday night to make a couple $100, like it didn't matter what they were going to pay me. It was going to be more than that. And like, it was in downtown in a super nice office building and district. I was like, man, it was, everything about it was super cool. And then the track design group all pretty much had come the same way that I did. They all started by building their own stuff and then got hired on to the team. So they had a similar background and a similar passion. And we ended up all going to the race together on that Saturday. And I don't remember even the interview being much more than just hanging out and getting to make sure my personality fit. I think they already knew the skill set was going to be okay. And honestly, I know that Mike there, who he's the one that builds the track maps still for the Supercross like broadcasts that you see, the 3D animated ones and stuff. He was already there, and Moto dude, and we became very, very good friends. And I know his attitude was, I don't really care what you know as far as the track design part, because I can teach you. It really was, as long as your personality is good and a fit with the team. And I guess it fit because they brought me on. And I mean, and then it was, how soon can you start? I think it was like 2 weeks later, I was packing my life up and moving to Arizona. And I mean, I remember I drove out on the day after Valentine's Day. And like I said, my interview was Phoenix Supercross. And all this started over, like I said, I dropped out of college, or decided I wasn't going to go back to college at semester break. So all of this happened in, a month and a half, completely transforming and changing my life and dropping everything. I mean, I had to find a place to live out there and drive across country. And I mean, I didn't know what I was getting into. I was still young, but it was one of the coolest experiences. I would never change that for the world, because it made me grow up at a younger age too.
Well, certainly. And I really vibe with that as far as your experience in the interview, because I think all too often people get so nervous about going into an interview. But what it really is a manager trying to find out, can I work with this person? Is this person that it can be, can they be led? Can they be a leader? And trying to just get that initial vibe, and then sort of like, that's why they say like first impressions are so important, is because like you only have a small snapshot of opportunity to sort of find out whether this person, like, yeah, you can look at someone's resume, but talk to someone for 10-15 minutes to find out whether or not that resume is completely full of shit or not. Clearly you were able to gel with people, and clearly you're able to sort of just acclimate yourself in there immediately. Like, did you have a lot of input on Untamed as a title, or was that basically finished by the time you already got there?
Yeah, Untamed was I would say 50% of the way through development. So I didn't really get to create much. I came in and there was a lot of like, I placed hay bales around the tracks that were already built, and to AI to race, and learning all of those tools in team. There wasn't a lot of opportunity left to make tweaks or changes on that title, but it was more of the busy work side of things. But it was okay, because it allowed me to learn the team and the tool set and all of that side of things. And then also I was just like tied down to learning all of the processes and stuff, but also that built up ambition of, I want Cut Loose to actually design my first game track. So I had this, it's like when a rider has an injury and they come back and they're just so excited to ride because they've had something almost taken away from them. So it was just, it was a bunch of built up excitement and ideas and creativity. And I mean, one of the coolest things about our offices where they gave us pretty much whatever we wanted for us to be creative and do our jobs, but all of our track designers, we all had a TV and DVD player sitting at our desks, and we ran moto movies constantly through those things, and we'd always use it for inspiration and ideas. and we're all just feeding off of each other. So you also have all these built up ideas of, well, I've been watching all these cool things and putting them in my head and kind of backstoring them until it was time to finally let them loose when we got into MX versus ATV Reflex.
Well, there you go. And that to this day is still one of my favorite titles. It is my favorite title. I'm not even say it's one of. It is my favorite title. It's the only game that I think I would still put in on a regular basis and play. I haven't played video games regularly in quite some time. But for me, it's that game. It's just like the time in my life when I was sort of late teens, early 20s, and able to still kind of play guilt-free, I suppose. I don't know why. There's maybe a stigma around where playing video games later on in life. Maybe there shouldn't be. But either way, a couple questions I had for you about the crew of characters you worked with. Like, who are some of the people that were really stuck out to you as people that were sort of part of that crew? Like, was I obviously one of the things that was talked about early in the middle of the 2000s was Ernesto,
Stefan Rancata.
Stefan Rancata, known for doing a lot of like track design work and stuff like that. I assume the people that you worked with was a steady mix of people who were actual like active riders, and you must have enjoyed being able to do a little bit of riding down in AZ, but also some people who like they work for the brand, but then they themselves they don't ride. Is that the case?
It was really an interesting time at the company because the original people that worked on the MX versus ATV games and like MX Unleashed and ATV Off-Road Fury and stuff, which included Stefan, like a big group of them had left and started another studio just a couple blocks away, called 2XL Studios, and they were making like the Baja games and they were doing some mobile stuff
Okay.
and whatnot. And there was a lot of crossover because obviously they had worked with a lot of people that were still at Rainbow Studios in the past. So, I mean, we'd see them at like happy hours and dinners and stuff. We'd get together after work. And it was at least on my side, it was always super friendly. And, we didn't talk about work a ton. It was just, we still shared a lot of the same passion of a lot of guys that were into like off-roading and that side of things. But yeah, I didn't get to work with Stefan, but I was basically part into his position. But the group of people at the studio, it was always a little bit of a struggle because there was those of us that ride and are super big fans of the sport. And then there's the other guys that they're just programmers and they just know how to make video games and they just want to make cool technology. And the fact is it probably takes both. And they would pull really hard on the casual side of things and the arcade side of things. And then of course we'd pull on no, it needs to be core. We want to build basically a replica simulation type game that's accessible. So there was definitely those battles within and trying to get things accomplished. It actually was probably one of the things that was the most frustrating for me was I don't think we truly did either one of them well because of that struggle. If it was you get your way in this spot and I get my way in that spot, and then we never really get to the absolute best result.
Fair enough. And I think that's why for me, Reflex was maybe that perfect cross section. Like it had some in like there like the physics of the game to me was very realistic. It didn't seem very arcadish. It was like the gameplay for myself, like it looked good. The tracks would break down. Whereas like when I watched like simulation by like MX Simulator and MX Bikes and stuff like that, and I like the games today. The tracks look so sterile, like they're like completely like just almost like in place and they don't change and there's no lines in them. And like honestly, for me, like the gameplay actually looks worse than it did 10, 20 years ago, which kind of has me scratching my head. But yeah, like I think you guys really captured lightning in a bottle there with Reflex. And then yeah, Alive wasn't a bad game either, but yeah, both are pretty solid.
Well, the crazy thing about the Reflex game is it was a brand new set of physics that was built from the ground up. And the physics for it were, I mean, it takes a long time to develop that. It started as a simulation and then they added basically helpers to dial it back. But when it came to the building of the game process, the first kind of thing that had to be done on the art side was the tracks had to be built because you can't lay down dirt textures and build environments or anything without the terrain there first. But yet the terrain is super dependent on the physics of the bike. It's not like you can just build a track and then expect the bike to work for it. You actually have to have the bike to test it. And we did a lot of testing. So the funny thing is the tracks in Reflex were actually built. I sat down with our physics programmer that tuned it, not the one that was actually doing the physical programming, but the tuning, and played with his tuning tool and developed a set of physics that was actually a hacked version of the Untamed physics. And I did that, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I just was looking for a feel, and I just stayed late at work one night, and like I stayed and played video games because it was fun. Like it wasn't a job to me, and so I created these physics, and I just was like, "Hey, you guys should check this out." And we ended up building all our tracks with that set of physics. And then another thing I tell people is we had this the very first version of terrain deformation that I've ever seen in a moto video game. There are programmers that put together, again, it was using those physics in one of the Untamed tracks, and they're like, "Hey, check this out." And it was insane. Like it was so cool. To this day, it was the best terrain deformation I've ever seen in a game. It would change gameplay and everything else. And unfortunately, like when we went over into Reflex and actually had the final version of it and not the prototype version, I don't think anything's ever been as good as that prototype was. That it's lost forever. And it's like I keep telling people, I was like, it was so sick. You'd be in a corner and you had to start cutting down out of the berm because the jump out of the corner was so rutted you couldn't get the 3 in anymore. And so it would change the gameplay a ton, or the whoops would start to get flattened out, and you either want to move into the line or out of the line based on if you wanted to jump through them or be flat. Like it was a real gameplay changer, which is something I've always wanted from a deformation system, and I've yet to get there. Those of you that are listening, if you've spent much time with BigMx Simulator, when their deformation stuff really started to come online, I spent hours upon hours upon hours working on trying to develop that system to accomplish what I wanted. And I mean, ultimately, that's what drove me to not really play video games anymore. It was frustration of trying to get that system to work, and it wouldn't work. And I couldn't get enough support from the rest of the community and the people to help, because it takes more than one person, unfortunately, to do something like that. I can drive ideas and facilitate stuff to an extent, but I'm not a programmer.
Fair enough. So, what was the first track, or maybe the track that you had the layout that you had the most amount of input on, that, and also you sort of look back and like, I am most proud of this layout because it plays well, it was popular, and what are also some hidden gems about those games?
Well, the one thing that was really nice was with Reflex, I was so dang excited that I was working nonstop, so I got to create a lot, because other people would fall behind schedule a little bit, and I'd be like, "Well, I'll just take that track on, I'll build that one." It was a weird process though too for me, because when I would build a track previously, I would just open Photoshop and just start building, and I would create the layout and everything as I went, just based on what flowed. Like I wouldn't know whether you were turning left or right after a section until I built it a lot of times. And in our process, because they had to develop environments and concepts and all this side of things, and we wanted them all to be unique and different, we blueprinted everything beforehand. And so that was the first time I actually had to create basically a track design without ever playing it, which was probably the hardest thing for me. And honestly, if you look back at the blueprints versus what actually became on my tracks, I changed them a ton. And luckily I was able to get enough freedom with that, with our art team and just working with them. But yeah, I mean, things would, because I wanted them to flow and be good. I don't remember which one I actually built first. I do remember like to build an easy track was really hard for me for the game, because I always like different rhythms and that side of things. And we always wanted to give like the intro players like a couple easy tracks to start with. And that was probably what I was worst at, because I didn't want a basic like stadium track that you don't really have rhythm options in. I was always completely different rhythms and multiple options. But I really liked It ended up being Stone Point 2, I believe. It was kind of like a little tighter, smaller track that I really liked in Reflex. The Kingston 2 track was cool because I basically just threw everything at it that I could, with going out of the stadium and the Jeremy McGrath Invitational inspired freestyle ramp jumps that I know a lot of people still hate and say they're not core. And I'm like, I'm more core than most of you guys. It's a video game and they're supposed to be cool, but that was really neat because it was just tons of rhythm and rhythm and rhythm. Um, I was pretty excited because although I didn't build it, I was a big part of testing the Fort Dodge 2 stuff and coming up with ideas for that one that goes jumping up into the stands and whatnot.
That's still my favorite layout by far. If I pop that into my Xbox right now, I can still play it.
Yeah, and it's a great looking track too. It just all of that was cool. So a lot of times what we would do, we had really sweet tools that you'd be sitting there and you're playing, and you just hit a live update button straight from Photoshop into the game. And like you'd be going, you could take a triple as you're going off of it and just take the landing away from someone or move it 10 feet so that in case they crash. But so you could have a lot of fun with that. But the reason that those tools were sweet was I could sit at my desk and be building a track while I have somebody else sitting there playing it, and I'm just watching it and tweaking to make it ride the way that I want just from watching it. So we did a lot of that just within our track design group as a whole, of tweaking how it rides, and like that whole up in the stands section. I was the one on the controller, not the one in Photoshop actually building it to create that, but it was cool. And it was ideas like that they're based in reality. Like you went up in the stands and stuff in races, and we just made it a little bit more extreme, but yet tried to keep it based in realism. And I feel like that's the stuff that Reflex did really well, is it still pushed the limits of what's real and what's not. But yet it was a game. And then on the outdoor side, all of the tracks were somewhat based off of real tracks or a hybrid of real tracks. So like, for instance, Moto 448 and Razorback were based off of an environment called the 500 in Stillwater, Oklahoma, where it's just right down the road from where Cooperland was. It's a public riding area, and it just took concepts and terrain from inspired by that, and then built a custom track out of it. And then the desert tracks were really fun. Those are probably some of my favorite to play. I thought that they raced really well. I don't remember what they were called at this point. It's been a while, but they were the dusty, dry ones. And I also thought that was one of the first times I've seen like Blue Groove captured in a video game, like just visually. I think that those were super unique and new and interesting.
How about a layout that obviously no one here that's listening to this is ever going to get to play it, but do you recall any tracks or layouts that basically got left on the cutting room floor?
There was a whole group of tracks that were built so to fast forward a little bit,
Okay.
to post to a live coming out, and I'm just verifying that I have all of this straight. It's been a while, but so during the production of Alive, we got told that there was going to be this big shift, and we were going to go to a digital title, and it was going to be heavily DLC based and such. And the corporate side of THQ came to us and said, yeah, we're going to pull Supercross out of the game and sell it separately. And I mean, I'm still a fan of the titles. Like when I'm working there, I'm very passionate about it because I want to play the game, and I about lost my mind. I can't believe I didn't lose my job with the way I was in some of the meetings and such, just very upset. But what ended up kind of being the promise to us was, hey, you're going to build this arcade style game for Alive, and it's going to have nationals only, but then we're going to follow it up with a more simulation style core hardcore game that's Supercross only, and it's going to drop with Supercross season. And that's what got us to shut up, because we all wanted that game. And so we'd do anything we could. We would do anything to make that game, because that's the one we wanted, like that hardcore type game that was more realistic. So I think we had 16 or 17 tracks built for that game. When I ultimately put in my resignation, and then a week after I left, they shut the company down, and those tracks are gone. I mean, and they're very much the same scale as like the James Stewart Compound Supercross tracks, and some of the DLC tracks that were released for Alive kind of ahead of time or maybe it was after it came back. I don't remember. There was a couple of them released, but there was, like I said, there was a huge batch of those tracks, and they'll never see the light of day, which is pretty crazy. And it's just insane how some of that stuff works. Like when putting a game out, the number of tracks is always important to me because, again, I'm a track guy. Like I don't care about gear or any of the other stuff or game modes. I want tracks. Like, just give me more to play. And so I remember we were building Alive, the people were behind again, and so when they're behind, they start cutting content because they don't change the deadline, they change the amount of content. And there was already a very few tracks on there, and the snow environment tracks that ended up in that game, they were going to cut that whole thing. And at the time, I'd moved on from being a track designer to a game designer, and again, I threw a fit. Like we can't put a game out. It was gonna be like 6 tracks total in the game or something. Like it was terrible.
That's brutal.
And I said, what if I was like, I'll come in this weekend and I'll build the whole environment in this weekend. If I have it for you on Monday, will you not cut it? And they agreed. So I literally basically lived at the office the whole weekend, and they're not my favorite tracks I've ever built. In fact, I think they're pretty terrible, but I'd rather them be in the game than not be in the game, and not have them. So that was just an interesting story of the way that they are. Is they're like, I'll just cut it. We don't care. For me, it was like, no, you can't. Like, this is the end product, cannot afford to have you cut those tracks out.
Fair enough. I think I'm sure there's more than a few people listening that would thank you for that. And that was one of the questions that I had about Alive, was why there was, I believe, out of 9 outdoor tracks, there was 3 winter/snow themed tracks, which up here in Canada I can relate to because I've actually raced in the snow twice on a dirt bike, not on a snowmobile or a timber sled bike. But yeah, like what was the deal with that and the rationale behind basically almost had the shades of GoldenEye's Siberia rounds?
Yeah, I mean, I had no say in the environment side of things on it. That's a little bit where the hardcore side of us, we got to build the track that we wanted to build on the track, but the non-core moto people got to kind of decide whatever they could make it look like whatever the heck they wanted. We didn't really care because we wanted the gameplay experience. Mm-hmm. And that was a little bit of the compromise for it, I guess, was that you can do whatever you want off the track, but just let us have the gameplay that we want on the track. But I mean, I think it could have been executed obviously much better with a little bit more time, but at least ultimately it stayed in the game. And it was a weird time for me at Rainbow Studios with Alive. Was I had transitioned after Reflex into a game design position instead of a track design position. And the reason being was we had a bunch of great track designers there that could do fantastic work. But I felt like in order for me to make a better product and steer the product better, I needed to move in where I could have a bigger kind of impact on the title. So I moved over into a game design position. So I wasn't even a track designer and jumped back into building tracks for that. And it was similar to what happened with the James Stewart compound. Was also during Reflex. I don't know if you remember, we used to have 5 pro riders in a game. Like that was all that we had, and like back into Untamed and whatnot. But with my connections from just racing in the past and being around the industry and that side of things, like I already knew a lot of the privateer guys and such, and I knew that they all would love to be in the game. And so I started there got them to let me get permission of, dude, give me some release forms. Let me go to Anaheim and Phoenix Supercrosses. And I just walked around the pits and hung out on Privateer Island, getting every single person that I could in the game. And they were all stoked on it, which later on, obviously, we transitioned to now I know every single privateer in the pits. And
Privateer proven, baby.
Privateer proven's going to be born, foreshadowing that a little bit. But also, so we started working with the industry companies, because we had companies like Fly Racing and, Fox or Troy Lee, or, your hard parts companies and that side of things, that of course, like FMF wants to be in the game, and we want them in there because it adds authenticity. But all we were doing was, you send us product, we'll put you in the game. And I took that a step further as well and started doing cross promo relationships. And um, we'll give you a little bit more exposure in the game, but you're going to promote us, and give us some marketing and that side of things. So I started dabbling into the marketing side and also getting to know people on the industry side of things. So as I transitioned into game design, well, we looked at the industry as a whole and who are the big fish that can reach both gamers as well as the moto industry more than anyone. And it's your energy drink companies. So I put proposals together for both Red Bull and Monster and Rockstar, who didn't really have any interest in doing anything, and convinced them to fly myself and one of our other guys out. And we actually visited Red Bull and Monster back to back in the same day with very similar proposals. They were personalized a bit. Monster didn't bite and Red Bull was all in. And I mean, I gave them a kind of an a la carte list of here's some ideas of what we can do. And they bid on the James Stewart compound idea. And to this day, the
Oh,
fact
the
that I
hours
literally
I
had
spent on that compound.
the fact that I had no marketing experience, I'm walking into Red Bull of all places and just like sitting in his meeting room and pitching them something like out of the blue. And the fact that they bid on it and were not only bid on it, they were super excited about it. And we put this whole program together and we got it all done. And then we told our corporate marketing department about it. And they were like, I don't know if they were blown away or embarrassed that we were able to do it with zero budget, because we didn't have a budget. They had all the money to spend. Anything I did, I had to do for free. And I mean, we delivered them James Stewart and Red Bull on a silver platter. They were working on some end cap like placements and stuff with Red Bull and the title that they were paying for, like all of this stuff. And then, of course, the marketing department on the corporate side sinks their teeth into it, and about killed the deal. And I was heartbroken through it. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, this thing's perfect. And honestly, for a minute, Red Bull really wasn't all that stoked, just because now they had this corporation trying to basically take advantage of them and use them up versus, when we did it, it was a win-win for everybody. But there was just another, I mean, I couldn't work in corporate America again. Like it was a time where I was doing the coolest project ever. It was like a dream. I'm building the Stewart compound and bringing James into the game. And, he's flying in and I'm directing videos, all those little video mini clips, which is just unbelievable. I never pictured myself being part of that. But at the same point, on the business side of things, I'm struggling internally. It was really challenging. And it actually got to the point too, again, track designers being behind, not being able to deliver stuff. The Stewart compound was going to be, I think they were switching the track designer that was going to build it, and it was not my favorite one. And I was like, this thing has to be perfect. Like, if we're going to do it, it needs to be done right. And then they told me, corporate cut the travel budget to go to the Stewart compound. And yeah, we don't have room for you to go. We're going to send our lead game designer instead. And I'm like, this has been my baby and my project for months on end. And you're not clipping me from it. And so I said, well, how about this? Why don't you let me be the track designer on the project? I know how to make tracks. I care about this project more than anyone. It's my baby. And luckily they bid on that. It actually took my buddy Dave, who was the one that flew to Red Bull Monster with me, threatening that, and he was our licensing manager as well. And he threatened that he's like, I'm not going if you clip him. Like, he basically put his ass on the line for me to be part of it.
Wow,
and
that's big.
I mean, Dave and I, we kicked a lot of ass together. Like, he handled all of the licensing and that side of things for me. So all the cross promo deals I had, he handled the legal side of all of them. And man, we walked into companies all the time and we just worked together well. And we both had a very similar vision of, we just want to be good people and we wanted to create something good for everybody. It wasn't like we were going in there asking them for something and we weren't willing to deliver for them on the other side. So, yeah, I finally got to fly to Florida and go to James's compound, and he took us around in a mule around the whole property and around the track and kind of explained, all of the nuances of the outdoor track and stuff. He wasn't riding at the time. He was dealing with injury stuff. Malcolm was there riding Supercross. Actually, one of his first days on Supercross was then. That was that long ago. Holy crap. But I guess I'm getting old. And then I still run through. Oh, I'm still on screen. Technical difficulties. Brad said he'll be right back. So hopefully he'll be able to join right back into this same meeting with us, and then I can continue my story. Plus, you guys just wanted to see my beautiful face anyways, right? Anyone that's watching, if this is still actually live, you are welcome to ask questions. I am watching the chat while we're doing it as well. I'm not sure if I should be ending this or just letting Brad come back, if he'll be able to come right back into the same one. Now would be a great time to plug Race Tech. Buy some Race Tech Gold Valves, plus fuel with drastically improved bottoming resistance and increased traction. All Race Tech products are 100% guaranteed and made in the USA. Crazy to think I used to be able to like